Princess and the Promise. This is a true story about a girl, a princess. Her name was Sarai, which means my princess. Like many princesses in many stories, Sarai was very beautiful. She was so beautiful, in fact, that kings stopped and turned their heads to look at her. Now, I'd love to be able to tell you that Sarai always behaved like a princess, that she was always kind and good. But remember, this is a true story, and I'm afraid that sometimes Sarai could be unkind and even cruel. Sarai, like most princesses, had a prince. Well, he wasn't a proper prince. He had no people and he had no country of his own, but he was a prince among men. He was the eldest son of the eldest son of the eldest son of the eldest son of the eldest son, and he was very wealthy. He had flocks of sheep and goats and camels and donkeys and gold and silver and many servants in his household. His name was Abram. Now, I'd love to be able to tell you that Abram always behaved like a prince, but remember, this is a true story. And although at times Abram could be very brave and generous too, there were other times when he was so frightened and cowardly that he put Sarai in great danger just to save his own skin. Now, you might think that Sarai and her prince were happy and contented with each other and all that they had, but there was a deep sadness in their lives. You see, Sarai could not have children. How they longed for a boy child who would take on the family name and inherit their wealth. Their pain wasn't made any easier to bear by the fact that their niece, Milcah, just kept having baby boys. Sarai and Abram lived nearly 4,000 years ago in a city called Ur of the Chaldees, near the mouth of the great river Euphrates, where it flows into the Persian Gulf in the country which today is called Iraq. This was a city teeming with activity, and it was here that God appeared to Abram and told him to leave that city, to leave his father's people, and to go to the land that he would show him. There God promised he would make him into a great nation, a people, and make him a great blessing to all peoples. Sarai and Abram had not long arrived in the land that God had shown them, the land of Canaan, when the news caught up with them that Sarai's niece, Milcah, had had another baby boy. There followed a famine in the land, so with heavy hearts and empty tummies, and thinking, well, maybe it wasn't to be, Sarai and Abram left the land that God had showed them and headed down into Egypt. Now, Egypt was a land not unlike Ur of the Chaldees, where they'd come from, where people worshipped the moon and built great temples and tombs and pyramids. And it was here that Abram did a terrible thing. He said, "Sarai, you're such a beautiful woman. Surely one of the lords or nobles of this land will see you and kill me so they can take you for their wife. Tell everyone you are my sister so I won't get hurt." Sarai was faithful and loyal to her prince and did as he asked, and it was no less a person than Pharaoh, the king of that land, who took Sarai into his harem to make her his wife. Pharaoh loaded Abram with gifts for her sake, camels and donkeys and sheep and cattle and servants. Abram became even more wealthy. Sarai thought she would never see her prince again. But God had not forgotten Sarai and Abram or his promise. He brought a terrible disease on Pharaoh and his household because of Sarai, till Pharaoh said, "Abram, what have you done to me? Why didn't you tell me she was your wife?" And he gave his men orders to banish Abram from his land. So Sarai and Abram returned to Canaan, the land that God had shown them, where the news reached them that Milcah had had another baby boy. Sarai felt cut to the heart. Time went by, and Milcah had more baby boys. The pain for Sarai grew dull, as these things do as you grow old. Sarai was now past the age where women can have babies. She thought, God will keep his promise to Abram and build a family for him, but not through me, through someone else. So she came up with a plan which she hoped would keep her at the heart of Avram's story. Abram, she said, take my Egyptian maid, Hagar, the one Pharaoh gave me. Take her, she's young and strong, and build a family for me through her. As if forcing Hagar to carry her husband's child wasn't bad enough, Sarai began to mistreat Hagar spitefully, working her hard and cruelly. And when Hagar could bear it no longer, she ran away into the desert. 14 years passed by. Abram was nearly 100 years old, and Sarai nearly 90. She was still beautiful and graceful, and kings and leaders of neighboring tribes still stopped and turned their heads and said, "Who is that woman?" Abram was known and respected, a prince among men, but still a prince without a people or a place. As he was sitting in the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day, Abram looked up and saw 3 shapes shimmering in the heat haze coming towards him out of the wilderness. As they came closer, the shapes solidified, and he could see it was 3 men. He knew it was the Lord, and he ran to greet them, bowing low. He settled the men in the shade of the trees and ran to order his servants to rustle up food and refreshment. Then he stood by to watch as they ate. And Sarah was watching and listening from behind the curtain at the entrance to the tent. One of the men said, "This time next year I will return, and your wife Sarai will have a son." Sarai chuckled to herself. "Will I have this pleasure, now I'm worn out and my prince is old?" Then the Lord said to Abram, "Why did Sarai laugh? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return, and Sarai will have a son." Sarai was afraid, so she lied. "I did not laugh." But the Lord said, "You did laugh." The Lord was kind to Sarai, and he kept his promise. Sarai bore Abram a son, and he called him Isaac, which means he laughs. Sarai said, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me." Just then the news arrived from the east that Milcah had had another boy. This time Sarai and Abram just looked at each other and smiled. Abram had other children by other wives, and they too became great nations. But it was through Sarai's child Isaac, the child of the promise, that the greatest of all kings came to be born, and the greatest of blessings came to all peoples. And so, Sarai, who couldn't have children, Sarai, who was past the age when women have babies, Sarai, who could be mean and cruel, Sarai, who dared to tell a lie under God's nose. This Sarai believed God. She believed he would keep his promise to her. And so her name was written in the book of life.